Good evening, my friend. Tonight I want to take you somewhere extraordinary, somewhere ancient and wild and magnificent, a world that existed long before Christianity reached the frozen shores of Scandinavia, long before the great cathedrals of Europe touched the sky, long before Rome itself crumbled into memory. This is a world of ice and fire, a world where gods walked among frost giants, where ravens carried secrets across infinite skies, where warriors dreamed not of peaceful heavens, but of dying gloriously in battle so they might feast forever in golden halls with the gods themselves. This is Norse mythology, and here's what makes it unlike any other mythology you've ever encountered. Unlike the immortal gods of Greece who sat untouchable on Mount Olympus, the Norse gods knew something terrifying about themselves. They knew they would die. They knew exactly how they would die. They knew the names of the monsters destined to kill them, and yet they chose to live fully anyway. They chose to love deeply anyway. They chose to meet their fate with courage rather than hide from it in despair. There's something profound in that, don't you think? Tonight, we're going to journey through this entire mythology from beginning to end. From the moment when nothing existed, except an empty void called Ginnungagap, to the final battle where gods and monsters destroy each other and the world burns. And then, remarkably, to what comes after, because in Norse mythology, endings are never truly endings. We'll meet Odin the All-Father, who sacrificed his own eye for wisdom and hung himself from a cosmic tree for 9 agonizing days to unlock secrets no other being could access. We'll meet Thor the Thunder God, whose hammer protected humanity from giants who wanted nothing more than to crush us. We'll meet Loki the Trickster, whose brilliant mind saved the gods countless times, and whose betrayal would eventually doom them all. We'll walk through 9 worlds connected by a tree so vast it defies imagination. We'll feast in Valhalla with warriors who died in glory. We'll stand at the edge of existence and watch the universe tear itself apart. But for now, just settle in. Let your breathing find its natural rhythm. Let your body sink into whatever surface holds you. This story has been told for over 1,000 years, around flickering fires while snow piled against wooden walls. Tonight, I'll tell it to you the same way it was told to Viking children a millennium ago. Let us begin where all things began in the void the Norse called Ginnungagap. In the beginning, there was nothing. Not darkness, because darkness implies the absence of light, and light had not yet been created. Not silence, because silence implies the absence of sound, and sound did not exist. Not emptiness, because emptiness implies a space waiting to be filled, and space itself had no meaning yet. There was simply nothing. The Norse called this primordial void Ginnungagap, which translates to the yawning gap or the gaping abyss. For an eternity beyond human comprehension, this nothingness was all that existed. No time, no space, no matter, just an infinite expanse of absolute void stretching in every direction that didn't technically exist yet. But here's where it gets fascinating. At some point, though, the ancient stories never explain exactly how or why 2 realms began forming at opposite ends of this infinite nothing. To the north emerged Niflheim, a realm of ice mist and bone-chilling cold beyond anything you've ever experienced. Imagine the coldest winter night you can remember, then multiply that cold by 1,000. From the heart of Niflheim poured 11 rivers called the Ilivagar, whose waters were so impossibly frigid they froze everything they touched into solid ice. To the south emerged something entirely different. Muspelheim, a realm of fire flames and scorching heat that would blind any creature foolish enough to gaze upon it. This wasn't the gentle warmth of a summer afternoon. This was primal, chaotic, destructive fire that had burned since before time itself began. At the borders of Muspelheim stood a figure who had always been there waiting, a fire giant of immense power named Searcher holding a flaming sword. What he was waiting for, we'll discover much later in our story. Now picture this in your mind. For ages beyond counting, these two realms existed at opposite ends of Ginnungagap, ice to the north, fire to the south, the void between them, nothing happening, nothing changing, nothing moving, just existing in perfect stillness, waiting for something to change. Then, slowly, inevitably, something did begin to occur in the space where these two forces approached each other. The frozen rivers of Niflheim crept closer and closer toward the center of the void. The heat and sparks of Muspelheim drifted further and further from their blazing source, and in the middle of Ginnungagap, where these two opposing forces finally met, where impossible cold touched unbearable heat, something remarkable happened. The ice began to melt, drip by drip, drop by drop. The frozen poison of those primordial rivers started to thaw, and from those drops, from that meeting of perfect opposites, life itself emerged for the very first time. Not plant life, not human life. Something far stranger and more ancient than anything that would come after. The first being to ever exist took shape from the melting ice, a giant of unimaginable proportions, a creature formed from frost and water and the raw stuff of creation itself. His name was Ymir, and everything that would ever exist in all the nine worlds, every creature, every god, every giant, every human, would trace their origins back to him. His body would eventually become the raw material for all of creation itself. But Ymir didn't know that yet. He simply existed alone in the darkness, the first and only conscious being breathing and waiting for whatever would come next. And what came next was stranger than Ymir himself. So there was Ymir, this impossibly vast creature formed from melting ice in the middle of an infinite void, the first giant, the first living being in all of existence. But here's something I find deeply fascinating about this particular myth. Ymir didn't wake up with some grand cosmic purpose. He didn't emerge with a divine mission or a destiny he understood. He simply existed. He was hungry. He was tired. He was utterly alone in darkness so complete it had never known light. Despite being a primordial giant of cosmic proportions, his experience was surprisingly relatable to anyone who has ever felt alone and uncertain about what comes next. Now, Ymir needed sustenance to survive, and from the same melting ice that had formed his body, another creature emerged to provide exactly that. Her name was Audhumbla, the primordial cow. I know a cosmic cow might seem strange at first, but think about it for a moment. In agricultural societies, cattle represented life itself. Milk meat, leather, labor. For the Norse people who created these stories, there was nothing more natural than imagining that the first creature to nourish life would be a cow. Audhumbla was enormous beyond any description, and from her udders flowed 4 rivers of milk that sustained Ymir in that dark void. But here's where our story takes a truly unexpected turn. While Ymir drank and slept, his body began doing something extraordinary without any conscious effort on his part. From the sweat beneath his left arm, 2 beings emerged, a male and a female frost giant. From his legs, which rubbed together as he slumbered in the darkness, another giant was born. Ymir was creating life without even trying, without even being aware of what was happening. He was literally dreaming giants into existence. These were the Jötnar, the frost giants, who would become the eternal enemies of the gods throughout all of Norse mythology. Every giant who would ever threaten the golden halls of Asgard, every frost giant who would battle Thor, every monster lurking in the frozen wastes at the edges of the world, they all descended from these first beings born of Ymir's sleeping body, an entire race created from sweat and unconscious movements in the dark. Meanwhile, Audhumbla, the primordial cow, was busy with her own purpose in this void. She needed sustenance too, and she found it in the strangest place imaginable. She began licking the salty ice blocks that littered Ginnungagap, lick after lick after lick, her rough tongue wearing away at the frozen surface, revealing something hidden beneath. On the first day, hair appeared, just hair frozen in the ice, slowly being exposed to the void. On the second day, a head emerged, a face, features, frozen but somehow perfect. On the third day, a complete being pulled himself free from the ice that had imprisoned him since before time began. His name was Buri, and he was not a giant. He was something entirely different, something that would change the fate of the entire universe forever. Buri was beautiful and powerful, and he would become the ancestor of all the gods themselves. Two bloodlines now existed in the void. Giants descended from Ymir, gods descended from Buri. These two families would become locked in conflict for all of time, and what came next would set that conflict into motion forever. Buri, freshly emerged from the ice that had held him since before time began, was alone among his kind. But he had a son named Bor. The ancient myths never tell us who Bor's mother was, which is fascinating in itself. Some mysteries, even the original storytellers chose to leave unexplained. Perhaps some origins are simply too sacred or too strange to speak of directly. Now, here's something that reveals the incredible complexity hiding within Norse mythology. Bor, the son of Buri, an ancestor of all the gods, fell deeply in love with a giantess. Her name was Bestla, and she was the daughter of a frost giant. Consider what this actually means for a moment. The gods and giants who would become eternal bitter enemies throughout all the stories were actually related by blood from the very beginning. The hatred between them wasn't the hatred of complete strangers, it was family conflict, the worst kind. Brother against brother, cousin against cousin, blood against blood. Bor and Bestla had 3 sons together. The eldest was Odin, who would become the most powerful and complex god in all of Norse mythology. Then came Vili, then Ve. These 3 brothers would become the first true gods, the shapers of reality itself, the creators of the world as we know it. And almost immediately after coming into their power, they recognized something deeply troubling about their situation. Ymir, that vast primordial giant, was still producing offspring while he slept. More and more giants were emerging from his body with every passing age. The void was filling with frost giants, and the 3 brothers realized that if this continued unchecked, there would be no room for anything else. No room for other gods, no room for new forms of life, no room for the worlds they dreamed of creating, just giants multiplying forever in the darkness. So they made a decision, a terrible decision that would echo throughout all of time. Odin, Vili, and Ve attacked Ymir, the first living being, the source of all the giants. Their own distant relative through Bestla's bloodline, they fell upon him, and after a battle whose details have been lost to the ages, they killed him. But here's what made this act so utterly catastrophic. When Ymir died, his blood poured out of his massive body in quantities beyond imagination. Remember, this was a being of cosmic proportions whose size defied comprehension. His blood became a flood that swept through Ginnungagap, drowning almost all of the frost giants who had descended from him. An entire race nearly wiped out in a single cataclysmic instant. Only 2 giants survived this primordial genocide. Bergelmir and his wife, who managed to climb into a hollowed log and float upon the flood of blood until the waters finally subsided. From these 2 survivors, all future giants would descend, and they would never forget what Odin and his brothers had done, never forgive. The enmity between gods and giants wasn't arbitrary hatred. It was rooted in this act of violence at the dawn of creation. Now the 3 brothers stood in a void filled with Ymir's enormous corpse, and they faced a question that would define everything that followed. What do you do with the body of a giant so impossibly large that his blood could flood the entire universe? Their answer was extraordinary. The body of Ymir lay before the 3 brothers, stretching across the void in every direction. Odin, Vili, and Ve stood before this vast corpse of the primordial giant whose blood had just flooded all of existence. And now they did something that reveals the Norse understanding of creation in its most profound form. They wasted absolutely nothing. Every single part of Ymir would become something essential to the cosmos they were building. Let me walk you through exactly what they created, because it's truly remarkable when you understand the scope of what they accomplished. They took Ymir's flesh, that enormous mass of primordial matter, and they shaped it into the earth itself. The ground beneath your feet, according to Norse mythology, is giant flesh. They called this realm Midgard, which means Middle Earth. Yes, Tolkien borrowed that name directly from Norse mythology for his own legendary works. Midgard was positioned at the center of the cosmos, destined to become the realm where humans would eventually walk and build and dream. From Ymir's blood, which had already flooded the void, they created the oceans, the seas, the lakes, and the rivers. Every body of water in existence was giant blood still flowing through the veins of the world. His bones became the mountains themselves. When the Vikings looked up at the snow-capped peaks of Scandinavia, they believed they were seeing the skeleton of the first being who ever lived. His teeth and scattered bone fragments became rocks and boulders littering the landscape. Now here's where it gets especially interesting and strange. They took Amir's skull, that massive dome of bone, and they lifted it up to create the entire sky. The sky from horizon to horizon was the inside of a giant skull, but a skull that impossibly large needed support, so they placed four dwarves at the four corners of the world to hold it up forever. Their names were Nordri, Sudri, Austri, and Vestri, north, southeast, and west. These dwarves have held up the sky ever since, never resting, never failing, never complaining about their eternal burden. From Ymir's brain, they created the clouds. So, when you look up at clouds drifting lazily across a summer sky, the Norse would tell you that you're looking at the thoughts of a dead giant still floating around inside his own skull. There's something almost poetic about that image, isn't there? The dreams of the first being still drifting overhead millennia after his death. They took the sparks and embers from Muspelheim, that realm of fire in the south, and scattered them across the inside of Mir's skull. These became the stars, the moon, and the sun. The cosmos was finally illuminated after ages of darkness. And finally, from Ymir's eyebrows, they created a protective fence around Midgard. This fence separated the realm of humans from Jotunheim, the realm of giants. It was a boundary, a protection, a constant reminder that chaos and destruction were always waiting just outside. Think about what this creation story reveals about how the Norse saw reality. Nothing is wasted. Even death becomes raw material for new life. The universe isn't created from nothing by a distant god's command. It's built physically and messily from the body of a slain being. Creation requires sacrifice. Life requires death. These themes echo throughout all of Norse mythology. And now the brothers had a world, but it needed structure and connection. At the center of everything holding the entire universe together stood a tree. Not just any tree. An ash tree of impossible size named Yggdrasil. Its branches stretched into the heavens far beyond where any eye could see, covering the sky itself. Its three massive roots plunged down into three different realms, anchoring all of existence. And nestled among its branches and roots were 9 distinct worlds, each home to different kinds of beings with their own stories and struggles. Understanding Yggdrasil is understanding how the Norse saw reality itself. The cosmos wasn't empty space with planets floating randomly. It was an organic living structure held together by this single magnificent tree. The name Yggdrasil itself tells us something important. Ig was one of Odin's many names, and Drasil means horse. So Yggdrasil translates to Odin's horse. This refers to something we'll explore later when we discuss the 9 days Odin hung from this very tree as a sacrifice to himself. He rode the tree like a gallows, which is why gallows were sometimes called the horse of the hanged. Dark imagery, but the Norse never shied away from darkness. Now, let me walk you through the 9 worlds because each one matters to understanding this mythology completely. At the top, sitting in the highest branches, was Asgard, the glorious home of the Aesir gods. Odin, Thor, Frigg, and all the other deities who ruled the cosmos dwelt there in golden halls. Connected to Asgard was Vanaheim, home of the Vanir gods, a separate tribe of deities associated with fertility nature and the growing things of the earth. In the middle section of the great tree was Midgard, the world of humans, where we live and die and wonder about what lies beyond. Also in this middle region was Jotunheim, the dangerous land of the giant sworn enemies of the gods. Alfheim was home to the light elves, beautiful luminous beings associated with the sun. Svartalfheim, sometimes called Nidavellir, was home to the dwarves and dark elves, master craftsmen, who lived in caverns underground, forging magical weapons and treasures. Down among the roots lay the darker realms. Niflheim, that primordial realm of ice and mist, still existed cold and ancient. Muspelheim, the realm of fire, still burned, guarded by Surtur, who waited with his flaming sword. And Helheim, the realm of the dead, ruled by Hel, the daughter of Loki. But here's what I find most fascinating about Yggdrasil. The tree was alive in ways that went far beyond how normal trees are living things. Creatures moved through it constantly in an eternal dance of conflict and communication. At the very top sat an enormous eagle, wise and watchful, surveying all 9 worlds. Between the eagle's eyes perched a hawk named Vedrfolnir. At the roots, a terrible dragon named Nidhugger gnawed constantly at the tree, trying to destroy the very foundation of existence. And running up and down the trunk, carrying messages between the eagle and the dragon, was a squirrel named Ratatoskr. This squirrel carried insults back and forth between the eagle and dragon, keeping their conflict alive forever. Some scholars believe this represents how gossip and communication can perpetuate conflict, a small creature causing enormous damage through nothing but words. The tree was constantly threatened, yet it stood. And high in its branches, the gods looked out over creation, knowing that eventually the tree would fall. But not yet. For now, let's visit their golden home. Imagine a realm of impossible beauty where every surface catches light and transforms it into gold. Towers rising so high they seem to pierce the sky itself. Halls so vast they could hold thousands of warriors feasting simultaneously. Gardens where the gods walked in eternal peace discussing the fate of worlds. This was Asgard, and let me tell you what made it so remarkable. Asgard sat at the highest point of Yggdrasil, above all other realms, looking down upon the cosmos the gods had helped create. The gods hadn't always lived there, of course. After creation, they built it themselves, constructing halls and palaces and defensive walls that would protect them from the giants who sought their destruction. Each major god had their own hall, their own domain within the greater realm. But the most famous hall in all of Asgard was Valhalla, which belonged to Odin himself. We'll explore Valhalla more deeply when we discuss death and the afterlife, but for now, let me paint you a picture of its magnificence. Valhalla had 540 doors, and each door was wide enough for 800 warriors to march through side by side. The rafters holding up the roof were made entirely of polished spears. The roof itself was shingled with gleaming shields that caught the light of the eternal sun. Every single day, warriors who had died bravely in battle on Midgard fought each other in the vast courtyard, honing their skills for the final battle to come. Every evening, their wounds healed completely, and they feasted together on endless meat and mead. This was the Viking heaven, and it was glorious and violent, and unlike anything other cultures imagined. But Valhalla wasn't the only significant hall in Asgard. Freya, the goddess of love and war, had her own magnificent hall called Folkvangr. Half of all warriors who died gloriously in battle went to her rather than to Odin. Heimdall, the eternal watchman of the gods, lived in Himinbjörg, positioned right at the edge of Asgard where the Rainbow Bridge began. Frigg, who was Odin's wife and queen of Asgard, had a hall called Fensalir. Thor lived in a region called Thrudvangur in a hall with 540 rooms to accommodate his enormous appetite and larger than life personality. Now, about that rainbow bridge. Bifrost connected Asgard to Midgard, the realm of humans, allowing the gods to travel between worlds. It appeared to mortals looking up from below as a rainbow, but it was actually a burning bridge of incredible strength and power. Only the gods themselves could walk upon it without being destroyed by its sacred flames. At the Asgard end stood Heimdall, forever watchful, never sleeping, ready to sound his mighty horn Gjallarhorn if enemies ever approached. Here's something important that reveals how the Norse understood their gods. Asgard had walls, and those walls had once been broken. After a devastating war with the Vanir gods, Asgard's defenses were damaged. The gods weren't invincible. They needed protection. They needed a watchman who never slept. They were remarkably human in their vulnerabilities. Daily life in Asgard had rhythms and patterns just like mortal life. The gods feasted and argued and loved and planned. They knew what was coming eventually. They knew the feast would end, and the one who knew more than anyone else sat on the highest throne, watching and waiting. Let me tell you about Odin, not the version you might have seen in movies or comic books, the real Odin as the Norse actually understood him. Because the real Odin is far more fascinating and far more unsettling than any modern adaptation has captured. Odin was called the All-Father, and he ruled as king of the Aesir gods from his throne in Asgard. But he wasn't a kind grandfatherly deity who watched over humanity with benevolent concern. He was a god of war, death, wisdom, poetry, magic, and the mysterious runes. He was cunning and relentless and utterly obsessed with knowledge. He would sacrifice anything to know more, even pieces of himself. The most famous story about Odin concerns his missing eye. At the base of Yggdrasil lay a well called Mimisbrunner, the Well of Mimir. Its waters contained infinite wisdom and knowledge beyond what any being had ever possessed. Odin desperately wanted to drink from it. But the well's guardian, a being of ancient power named Mimir, demanded a price for access. Odin's eye. Without hesitation, without bargaining, without a moment of doubt, Odin plucked out his own eye and dropped it into the well. Then he drank deeply, and from that moment forward, he could see what others couldn't. He saw the threads of fate. He saw the future. He saw Ragnarok and his own death approaching. But even that sacrifice wasn't enough for Odin. He wanted to understand the runes, those magical symbols that held power over reality itself. And to gain this knowledge, he did something that still shocks people who hear it for the first time. He hanged himself from Yggdrasil. He stabbed himself with his own spear, and he hung there wounded and dying, suspended between life and death, for 9 days and 9 nights. The old poem describes it in Odin's own words. I know that I hung on a windswept tree 9 long nights, wounded with a spear, dedicated to Odin, myself to myself. He sacrificed himself to himself. On the 9th night, at the very moment of death, the runes revealed themselves to him in blazing clarity. He screamed and fell from the tree, reborn, with knowledge that no other being in all the 9 worlds possessed. Let me tell you about Odin's companions, because they reveal everything about who he truly was. 2 ravens sat on his shoulders, named Hugin and Munin, thought and memory. Every single day, they flew across all 9 worlds, seeing everything that happened everywhere. They returned each evening to whisper what they'd witnessed into Odin's ears. Through them, he knew what was happening in every corner of existence. 2 wolves lay at his feet, named Guri and Freki, ravenous and greedy. Odin fed them all the food set before him at every feast, because he himself consumed only wine. He cared nothing for earthly sustenance. His hunger was for knowledge alone. His 8-legged horse Sleipnir was the fastest creature in all existence, capable of carrying Odin between worlds in the blink of an eye. Here's what I find most remarkable about Odin. He knew exactly how he would die. He knew Fenrir, The great wolf would swallow him whole at Ragnarok. He'd seen it clearly in his visions, yet he prepared anyway. He fought fate with everything he had, knowing he would lose. And his son was something entirely different. If Odin was the god that kings and warriors seeking wisdom worshipped, then Thor was the god of everyone else, the common people, the farmers and fishermen and craftsmen who made up the vast majority of Norse society. And there's something genuinely beautiful about that distinction. Thor was Odin's son, and he ruled over thunder lightning and the storms that swept across Scandinavia with terrifying power. But more importantly, he was the protector of humanity itself. While Odin occupied himself with complex schemes and the pursuit of forbidden knowledge, Thor was refreshingly straightforward in everything he did. See a giant threatening Midgard, hit it with a hammer. See a monster emerging from Jotunheim, hit it harder. His approach to problems was simple in the best possible way. He was loyal, brave, hot-tempered, and always ready to defend those who couldn't defend themselves. Let me tell you about his hammer, because Mjolnir is one of the most famous weapons in all of world mythology. It was forged by dwarves, the master craftsmen who lived beneath the earth in Svartalfheim. Mjolnir could level entire mountains with a single blow. It always returned to Thor's hand after being thrown, no matter how far it traveled. It was practically indestructible, capable of withstanding any force brought against it. But here's a fascinating detail most people never learn. The handle was too short. This was actually Loki's fault. During the forging process, Loki transformed himself into a biting fly and attacked the dwarf, working the bellows, causing him to falter for just a moment at a crucial time. The result was a slightly imperfect weapon with a handle shorter than intended. Still devastatingly powerful, but requiring iron gloves called Jarngripur to grip it properly. Thor also wore a magical belt called Megingjord, which doubled his already immense strength whenever he buckled it around his waist. With these three items together, he was nearly unstoppable in combat against any foe. Thor's adventures fill countless pages of Norse mythology, but let me share one that perfectly captures who he was at his core. Once Thor went fishing with a giant named Hymir because Thor wanted to catch Jörmungandr, the world serpent who encircled all of Midgard beneath the waves. He used an entire ox head as bait and rowed out past where any sensible being would ever venture. When Jörmungandr took the bait, Thor pulled with all his supernatural might. He pulled so hard his feet actually broke through the bottom of the boat. He came face to face with the serpent, raising Mjolnir to finally end the monster. But Hymir, terrified beyond reason, cut the fishing line, and the serpent escaped into the depths. Thor and Jörmungandr were destined to meet again. At Ragnarok, they would finally kill each other in a battle that would shake the foundations of reality. What touches me most about Thor is his relationship with ordinary humanity. While other gods pursued their own agendas, Thor simply kept Midgard safe. When people heard thunder rolling across the sky, they knew Thor was somewhere up there fighting giants to protect them. He wasn't sophisticated like his father, he could be tricked easily, but he was utterly reliable. And he had a complicated relationship with someone who was anything but reliable. Every great mythology has its trickster figure, the one who breaks rules and causes chaos and keeps things interesting when order becomes stagnant. But Loki is different from all the others. He's not simply mischievous like some playful spirit. He's not purely evil like a demon. He exists in a space between categories, and that's precisely what makes him endlessly fascinating to explore. Loki was not originally one of the Aesir gods at all. He was the son of two giants, which means he came from the gods' sworn enemies. And yet, somehow, through circumstances the myths never fully explain, he became Odin's blood brother. They had literally mingled their blood together and sworn sacred oaths. Odin had promised that he would never drink from a cup unless Loki was also offered one. That's how close they were. Two beings from opposing bloodlines bound together by choice rather than birth. But why would Odin, the wisest being in existence, bind himself to such a chaotic, unpredictable figure? Because Loki was extraordinarily useful. His cleverness solved problems that raw strength alone could never handle. When the gods needed Asgard's walls rebuilt after war, it was Loki who ultimately saved them from an impossible bargain with a giant builder. When Thor's precious hammer, Mjolnir, was stolen by a giant, it was Loki who devised the plan to retrieve it, even though that plan required dressing Thor as a bride in a scheme so absurd it somehow worked perfectly. Loki was a shapeshifter of incredible skill and range. He could become a fly, buzzing unnoticed through the halls of giants. He could become a salmon swimming through icy rivers. He could become a mare or an old woman or almost anything else he wanted. This fluidity extended far beyond his physical form into his very morality. He could be genuinely helpful one moment and breathtakingly cruel the next, with no apparent pattern or reason. But here's where Loki's story turns irreversibly dark. Among the gods of Asgard, there was one named Balder. He was beloved by absolutely everyone, considered the most beautiful and gentle of all the Aesir. His mother Frigg had made every object in all existence swear a sacred oath never to harm her precious son. Every object except one, mistletoe, which she thought too small and too young to possibly matter. Loki discovered this single vulnerability, and he fashioned a small dart from mistletoe wood. Then, during a game where all the gods were throwing objects at Balder, laughing as everything bounced harmlessly off his invulnerable body, Loki guided the blind god Hoder to throw the mistletoe dart. It pierced Balder's heart and killed him instantly. The most beloved god struck down by the smallest plant through the scheming of someone who had eaten at his table. This was the unforgivable act. Loki had committed many crimes, played many cruel tricks, told many damaging lies throughout his long existence among the gods. But killing Balder the innocent, the beloved, crossed a line from which there could never be any return. The gods captured Loki and bound him beneath the earth with venom dripping eternally onto his face. There he would wait until Ragnarok, and his children would wait with him. Loki fathered many children throughout his long existence, but 3 of them were prophesied to bring about the complete destruction of everything. When the gods first learned of their existence, they were filled with a dread unlike anything they had ever experienced. And what they chose to do to these children reveals a tragedy that lies at the very heart of Norse mythology. The giantess Angerboda bore Loki 3 offspring in the dark lands of Jotunheim. The first was Fenrir, a wolf whose size defied comprehension, growing larger with every passing day. The second was Jörmungandr, a serpent so impossibly vast that when fully grown, he would encircle the entire world. The third was Hel, a girl whose body was split down the middle, with one half being living flesh of terrible beauty, and the other half being rotting corpse. The gods brought these 3 children to Asgard to decide their fate. Odin consulted the prophecies and learned something that chilled even his ancient heart. All 3 of these beings would play crucial roles in the destruction of the gods themselves. So the Aesir decided to act before the prophecy could unfold. They would prevent their own doom through preemptive action, or so they desperately hoped. Jörmungandr the serpent was thrown into the vast ocean that surrounded Midgard. But instead of drowning, as the gods intended, the creature thrived. He grew and grew until his body encircled the entire world, with his tail held firmly in his own mouth. The world serpent trapped in an eternal circle of his own making, waiting beneath the waves for the day he would rise. Hel was cast down into the darkest, coldest realm at the roots of Yggdrasil, far from the light of any sun. There she became ruler over all who died without glory. Those who perished from sickness or old age or accident rather than honorably in battle found themselves in her gray kingdom. Helheim became a place of cold and mist and endless waiting where millions of spirits accumulated under her half-beautiful, half-rotting gaze. But Fenrir presented the greatest challenge. The wolf was too powerful to simply cast away into some distant realm. He grew larger every single day. The gods attempted to bind him with chains, but he broke every fetter they forged. Finally, the dwarves created something special called Gleipnir. It appeared to be a delicate silk ribbon, but it was woven from impossible things: the sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, the spittle of a bird. Things that don't exist bound together into an unbreakable chain. The gods challenged Fenrir to test his strength against this ribbon. The wolf grew suspicious and agreed only if one god would place their hand in his mouth as guarantee of good faith. Only Tyr, the god of war, was brave enough. When Fenrir found he couldn't break free, he bit down and severed Tyr's hand completely. Here's the terrible irony the gods never understood. By fearing the prophecy and imprisoning these children, they gave them every reason to fulfill it. Fenrir would remember those chains, and he would have his revenge. Not all the gods in Norse mythology belong to the Aesir family that we've been discussing. There was another divine clan called the Vanir, and their complicated relationship with Odin's people reveals something important about how the Norse understood the nature of divine power itself. The Aesir were gods of war, death, wisdom, sovereignty, and the structured order of civilization. The Vanir were something quite different. They were gods of fertility, nature, prosperity, and the wild growing things of the earth. Different domains entirely, different temperaments, different ways of seeing and interacting with the cosmos. And at some point in the deep mythic past, before humans walked on Midgard, these two divine families went to war against each other. The Aesir-Vanir War stands as one of the oldest and strangest conflicts in Norse mythology. The ancient texts never explain exactly why it started, though some scholars suggest it began when the Vanir sent a practitioner of satyr magic that the Aesir found dishonorable and corrupting. Whatever sparked the initial hostility, the war that followed was long and devastating and costly to both sides. Neither family could achieve decisive victory, no matter how fiercely they fought. Eventually, exhausted and diminished, both sides agreed to make peace through an exchange of hostages. The Vanir sent two of their greatest gods to live permanently among the Aesir. The sea god Njordr came along with his two remarkable children, Freyr and Freya. In return, the Aesir sent Honir and the wise Mimir to live among the Vanir. This exchange gradually integrated the two families until the distinction between them blurred almost completely. Let me tell you about these Vanir gods because they played crucial roles in everything that followed. Freya was goddess of love, beauty, fertility, and also, surprisingly, war. The Norse didn't separate these concepts the way we might today. She rode a chariot pulled by cats and wore a magical cloak of falcon feathers that allowed her to transform into a bird and fly between worlds. She received half of all warriors, who died gloriously in battle, with the other half going to Odin in Valhalla. When she wept, her tears transformed into gold. Her brother Freyr was god of sunshine rain and the harvest that sustained all life. He owned a magical ship called Skidbladnir that could be folded up and carried in a pocket, yet expand to hold all the gods. He also possessed a golden boar that could run across the sky faster than any horse. He fell deeply in love with a giantess named Gerdr and gave away his sword to win her hand. This decision would prove fatal at Ragnarok when he faced the fire giant Surtur with no weapon. Beyond the Vanir, other gods deserve our attention. Tyr, whom we met losing his hand to Fenrir, was god of war and justice. His name shares roots with the Greek Zeus, suggesting he might once have been chief of the gods before Odin's rise. Heimdall the Watchman needed less sleep than a bird and could hear grass growing. His eyes could see 100 leagues in any direction. These gods each had their roles to play in the great story, especially when the end times finally arrived. But first, let me tell you about those who controlled even the gods' destinies. Perhaps no concept runs deeper through Norse mythology than the idea of fate. The Norse word for it was word, and it meant something quite different from how most people today think about destiny. Understanding the Norns and their weaving is understanding the very foundation upon which all these stories rest. Beneath one of the three great roots of Yggdrasil, hidden in shadow and mist, lay a well called the Well of Urdur, sometimes translated as the Well of Fate. Beside this sacred water lived three women. Not goddesses exactly, something older, something more fundamental to reality itself. The Norns had existed before the gods and would exist after them. They were woven into the fabric of existence itself. Their names were Urdur Verdandi and Skuld. These names translate roughly to what was and what is becoming and what shall be. Past, present, and future. Every single day, without rest or variation, they drew water from their well and mixed it with the white clay from the shore. They poured this mixture over the roots of Yggdrasil, keeping the world tree alive and healthy. Without their constant care, the tree would wither and all nine worlds would collapse into void. But their greater and more terrible task was the weaving. The Norns wove the fates of every living being into a vast tapestry that stretched across all of time. They took threads representing each life and wove them into patterns. The length of your thread was the length of your life. The pattern your thread followed determined everything that would happen to you. And once woven into the tapestry, fate could not be unwoven or changed by any power in existence. Here's what makes this concept so remarkable. Even the gods themselves were subject to the Norns' weaving. Even Odin, with all his accumulated wisdom and immense power, could not alter what had been woven for him. He could see his fate through the visions he'd purchased with his eye. He could know precisely how and when he would die, but he could never change a single thread. This might seem crushingly depressing at first consideration. If everything is already determined, why bother trying to change anything? But the Norse understood this very differently than we might expect. The question for them was never whether you would die. Everyone dies, even gods die. The question that actually mattered was how you would face your death when it came for you. Would you meet it with courage or collapse into cowardice? Would you struggle against fate with dignity or surrender to despair? The outcome was fixed, but your character remained entirely yours to forge. Consider Odin once more. He knew with absolute certainty that Fenrir would swallow him at Ragnarok. He had seen it clearly in visions that could not lie, yet he spent ages upon ages preparing warriors for a battle he knew with complete certainty he would lose. Why? Because meeting one's fate bravely was the highest virtue any being could achieve. What mattered was never whether you won. What mattered was how you fought. This understanding shaped everything about Viking culture. Warriors entered battle without fear because they believed their death day was already woven. And the most important pattern the Norns ever wove was the fate of everything, the doom that waited at the end of time. Death was never the end for the Norse. It was simply a doorway leading somewhere else, but the crucial question that shaped every Viking's life was this: where would that doorway lead? Because your destination in the afterlife depended entirely on one thing: how you died. If you died bravely in battle with weapon in hand facing your enemies, one of two glorious destinations awaited you. The most famous was Valhalla Odin's magnificent hall in Asgard. But here's something that surprises many people when they first learn it. Half of all battle-slain warriors didn't go to Odin at all. They went to Freya instead. They joined her in Folkvangr, her own hall of fallen heroes. The ancient texts never explain exactly how this selection was made. Perhaps Odin and Freya took turns choosing. Perhaps it was simply another decision woven by the Norns. The mystery remains. Life in Valhalla followed a remarkable daily pattern that reveals everything about what the Vikings valued. Every morning, the Einherjar, which means those who fight alone, rose from their beds and donned their armor. They marched out to the courtyard and fought each other in brutal combat. Real fighting, real wounds, real blood, real death. But here's the wonder of it. Every evening, as the sun set over Asgard, all the slain warriors rose again, completely healed without so much as a scar. They returned to the great hall together and feasted through the night. The feast itself was extraordinary beyond mortal imagination. A magical boar named Sarimnir was slaughtered and cooked every single day, providing endless quantities of succulent meat. Every night, the boar regenerated completely ready to be killed and cooked again. A goat named Heidrun stood on the roof of Valhalla, eating from branches of Yggdrasil that reached even into Asgard. From her udders flowed endless rivers of the finest mead, filling every horn that was raised. But this wasn't simply a reward for dying well. Every day of fighting was training. Every warrior in Valhalla was preparing for one specific battle. When Ragnarok finally came, they would march out of those 540 doors, shoulder to shoulder, and fight alongside the gods against the forces of destruction. For those who didn't earn a warrior's death, the afterlife was considerably less glorious. If you died of old age, sickness, accident, or simply failed to die in battle, you went to Helheim. This realm was ruled by the goddess Hel in her palace called Eljudnir. Helheim wasn't punishment exactly. It wasn't torment like the Christian concept of hell. It was simply cold and gray and empty, a vast realm of shadows where the dead existed without particular joy or pain, simply waiting, existing, forever. This belief shaped Viking culture more profoundly than almost anything else. They didn't fear death itself, they feared dying badly, dying in bed from sickness, dying without a weapon in hand. Stories tell of elderly Vikings who knew their time was approaching and would ask friends to wound them with a spear so they could technically die in battle and claim Valhalla's glory. Death was a door, and beyond that door, life continued in one form or another until the final death that even the dead would experience when everything ended. And now we come to the end. Ragnarok, the doom of the gods, the twilight of all powers. Every story we've told tonight has been moving toward this moment. Every hero we've met, and every monster we've described, and every thread the Norns have woven across countless ages. It all converges here at the end of everything. But Ragnarok doesn't arrive without warning. The universe announces its own death through signs and portents that grow increasingly terrible. Let me walk you through what the Norse believed would happen in the days before the final battle. First comes Fimbulwinter, the great winter, the murder of all seasons. 3 consecutive winters arrive with no summer between them. Not a single day of warmth or growth. Snow falls constantly from every direction. The sun provides no heat, though it still crosses the sky. Crops fail completely across all of Midgard. Animals starve and freeze. Humanity begins dying slowly, then quickly. But the cold isn't even the worst part of what happens. As the endless winter continues, the entire social order of humanity collapses. Brothers kill brothers over scraps of food. Fathers and sons turn against each other with murderous rage. All bonds of kinship and loyalty that held civilization together dissolve completely. Marriages shatter. Sacred oaths sworn before the gods are broken without hesitation. The moral fabric that separates humanity from beasts unravels thread by thread. Then the wolves finally catch their prey. Since the creation of the cosmos, 2 wolves have been chasing the sun and moon across the sky. Skjold pursued the sun relentlessly across the heavens. Hati chased the moon through the darkness. At Ragnarok, after ages of hunting, they finally succeed. Skjold swallows the sun. Hati devours the moon. The stars themselves fall from the sky like burning snow. The world is plunged into a darkness more complete than anything since Ginnungagap. The earth itself begins to shake with violent convulsions. Mountains that have stood since Ymir's bones formed them crumble into dust. Ancient trees are ripped from the ground by their roots. Every chain and every bond in all the universe snaps simultaneously. And this is what the gods have feared since they first learned of the prophecy, because among those breaking bonds are the chains holding Fenrir, the great wolf. Gleipnir, that magical ribbon woven from impossible things, finally fails. Fenrir rises from his prison, and his jaws stretch from the earth to the sky. Fire burns in his eyes as he remembers the ages of bondage. Loki, too, breaks free from where the gods imprisoned him beneath the earth. The serpent that dripped venom onto his face for uncounted ages falls away. He rises filled with hatred for the gods who bound him, filled with fury for what they did to his children. Jörmungandr, the world serpent, releases his tail from his mouth for the first time since being cast into the sea. The oceans surge over the land in massive waves as the serpent crawls toward Asgard, and Heimdall at his eternal post sees them all coming. He raises Gjallarhorn to his lips, the horn that has never been blown, the horn kept for this single moment since the beginning. He blows it, and every being in every world knows what that sound means. The armies face each other across a plain called Vigridr, which stretches 100 leagues in every direction. It has to be that vast to hold what's coming. On one side stand the gods and their allies, the Aesir and the Vanir together for the last time. The Einherjar from Valhalla finally putting their endless training to use. All who have fought throughout the ages to preserve order in the cosmos. On the other side stand the forces of chaos and destruction. The frost giants marching from Jotunheim, the fire demons of Muspelheim led by Surtur with his flaming sword, the dead from Helheim sailing in their ship made of fingernails, the monstrous children of Loki finally free after ages of imprisonment, and Loki himself at the front ready to destroy those who once called him brother. Everyone on both sides knows exactly how this battle will end. The Norns wove it long ago, Odin has seen it in his visions, but they fight anyway, because that's what the Norse understood about courage. Let me tell you about each confrontation as it unfolds. Odin the All-Father rides forward on eight-legged Sleipnir, with his spear Gungnir gleaming in whatever dim light remains. His ravens Hugin and Munin fly above him for the last time. He has spent ages preparing for this moment. He has sacrificed his eye and hung from Yggdrasil and gathered the mightiest warriors who ever lived. None of it matters. Fenrir advances with his impossible jaws stretching from earth to sky. Fire burns in his throat, and his eyes hold nothing but hatred. Odin charges the beast who will destroy him, and Fenrir swallows the Allfather whole in a single terrible instant. But Odin's son, Vidar, sees his father die. He wears a special shoe assembled from all the leather scraps ever cut from human shoes throughout all of history. He places this foot on Fenrir's lower jaw and grabs the upper jaw with both hands. With strength born of rage and grief, he tears the great wolf apart, avenging his father at last. Thor faces Jörmungandr, his ancient enemy, the serpent he almost caught fishing ages ago, the monster whose destiny was always intertwined with his own. They fight with fury that shakes the remaining foundations of reality, thunder against poison, hammer against fangs, and Thor wins. Mjolnir caves in the serpent's skull with a blow that echoes across dying worlds. But as Jörmungandr dies, the serpent sprays his venom one final time. Thor staggers backward, drenched in poison. He takes 9 steps. Then, the god of thunder, protector of all humanity, falls dead. Freyr faces Surtur with no sword because he gave it away for love. Tyr and the hound Garm slay each other simultaneously. Heimdall and Loki, who have despised each other since the beginning, find each other in the chaos. They fight with everything they have left, and they kill each other, falling together as they always knew they would. Surtur raises his flaming sword and sweeps fire across all 9 worlds. Everything burns. Yggdrasil itself is consumed. The world sinks into the sea, silence. But here's what makes Norse mythology unlike any other. The story doesn't end with destruction. After the fires of Surtur die down and the floods recede back into wherever cosmic waters go, after the silence has stretched for what might be eternity or might be a single moment, after everything that existed has been unmade. Something remarkable happens. The earth rises again from the waters, not the old earth scarred by ages of conflict between gods and giants, a new earth, green and fertile and impossibly fresh. Waterfalls tumble down mountainsides that have never known the weight of history. Eagles soar through skies that have never carried the smoke of burning worlds. Flowers bloom in meadows where no blood has ever been spilled. This is the rebirth, and I find it extraordinary that the Norse imagined this when so many other mythologies end in permanent destruction or eternal judgment. Some gods survive Ragnarok, not the great ones we spent so much time with tonight. Odin is gone, Thor is gone. The Allfather and his mighty son have passed beyond even memory, but others remain. Vidar, who avenged his father, lives on. Vali, another of Odin's sons, survives the carnage. Modi and Magni, the sons of Thor, inherit their father's hammer, Mjolnir, and carry his legacy forward into whatever comes next. And most remarkably of all, Balder returns. Remember Balder, the most beloved god whose death set Loki on his path to final betrayal? He had been in Helheim ever since that mistletoe dart pierced his heart. But now, with Ragnarok complete, and Hel herself destroyed, the gates of the dead open permanently. Balder walks out into sunlight for the first time in ages. His brother Hoder, who threw the fatal dart, walks beside him, forgiven completely. The cycle of violence that claimed them both has ended. These surviving gods gather in a meadow where golden Asgard once stood. They discover chess pieces in the grass, toys from the old world, the games their predecessors played. They sit together and discuss what was and what now is and what might yet come to be. A new generation of gods in a new world with new possibilities. And humanity? Two humans hid themselves inside the bark of Yggdrasil when Surtur's flames swept across all worlds. A man named Leif and a woman named Leifthrazir. Their names mean life and longing for life. When the new world rises from the waters, they emerge blinking into light that has never shone before. They feed on morning dew, and from them all future generations of humanity will descend. A new sun rises in the sky. She is the daughter of the old sun, born just before her mother was devoured by Hrol the wolf. The light that warms this new world is the child of the light that warmed the old one. The cycle continues, light returns, time begins again. The Norse didn't believe in permanent endings. Their cosmos was cyclical. Creation from destruction from creation. Winter into spring into winter once more. Death into rebirth into death again someday. This wasn't naive optimism. It was wisdom earned through harsh winters and violent times. Yes, everything ends. And yes, from that ending, something new and beautiful begins. And so we have traveled together through an entire world tonight. From the yawning void of Ginnungagap, where ice met fire and life first stirred into being, through the violent creation of the cosmos from a slain giant's body, where nothing was wasted, and death became the foundation of everything beautiful. Up into the branches of Yggdrasil, that great tree connecting all 9 worlds in its embrace, through the golden halls of Asgard, where gods feasted and worried and prepared for what they knew was coming. We've met Odin, who sacrificed everything for wisdom and still couldn't change his fate. Thor, who protected humanity with nothing more complicated than courage and a hammer. Loki, whose brilliant mind was both the greatest gift and the ultimate curse. We've met the Vanir and the Norns and the warriors feasting in Valhalla between their daily battles. We've watched the world end in fire and flood. Every god we came to know falling in that final battle. And then we've seen the world rise again, green and innocent and full of possibility, waiting for new stories to unfold. These myths survived over 1,000 years because they speak to something that lives in all of us. The Norse understood that life is temporary, that winter comes for everyone eventually, that even the mightiest powers fall when their time arrives. But they also understood something equally important. Courage isn't about winning battles you know you'll win. It's about how you face battles you know you'll lose. There's deep comfort in that ancient wisdom. Whatever challenges tomorrow brings you can meet them the way the Norse met their fate. Not with denial, not with despair, with whatever courage you can find in yourself, and with the knowledge that after every ending, something new begins. After every Ragnarok, the world rises again. After every winter spring returns. Rest well now, my friend. Let your eyes close. Let your breathing slow. Let these ancient stories settle gently into dreams. Sleep peacefully, and may you wake tomorrow ready to face whatever your Norns have woven for you. Good night.